Hello everyone and welcome to this week's edition of Organic Matters, the podcast brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. And I'm here on the farm, well, the rented farm. It's all very interesting. We've been walking around, there's lots going on with Brian McCarthy from Cork Rooftop Farms. Brian, thanks very much for joining us. Give people the lay of the land.
So we're here in Glenbrook and we just took on 60 acres here, lease since the 1st of January, and it's been going through organic conversion since the 1st of January. So it was a big leap for us. We had been growing in no-dig market garden style up until for the last 3 years on a much smaller scale. So up until last year we were probably in around 3 acres of no-dig market gardens. So this is a big jump for us this year, and that's not been without its steep learning curve accompaniment, but we're getting there. It's been a difficult year, weather-wise, difficult year just to get so much up and running so quickly. But yeah, we're starting to see, I suppose, the fruits of our labour a bit down towards the end of the summer.
Take me back a few years though. How did this actually begin for you? Cork Rooftop Farm.
Yeah, so it started literally the week that the country got locked down in March of 2020. So I have a fresh cut flower business and we had to close that temporarily, and to save myself from climbing the walls I started growing some fruit and vegetables on the rooftop of the former premises.
Was that in Cork City Centre?
Yeah, right in the heart of Cork City Centre. So my apartment literally backed onto it and had all this space, so I started growing fruit and veg up there. No formal background in farming or horticulture. Basically anything that I had been exposed to had been at a kind of an amateur scale, kind of my own father or my grandmother, things like that. So did a very deep dive, I would say, and have been continuing to dive deeper ever since.
You've gone from a rooftop to how many acres?
Yeah, 60 now, and it's
in what, 2-3 years?
Yeah, we're in year 4, but we're going to have to press pause on the growth of land, and just I think certainly the next few years is going to be all about really honing in and consolidating what we're doing and trying to perfect the processes and the systems we have in place on the farm.
You're relatively young as well.
Yeah, well, I'm 38, so I feel young anyway. Whatever about the number getting larger, but it's I mean we've quite ambitious plans for the farm over the coming years. It is a long-term plan, I guess, for the farm. We've a long-term lease with that in mind, which I guess is unusual. And
you took over from a dairy farm.
Correct, yeah. So this has been in dairy for generations beforehand. So the whole farm was in grass. So that was our initial challenge in the spring, and coming out of the wettest spring in living memory to try and get contractors in to get the land out of grass and into something that we could plant a seed or a plant into was challenging, and we probably in fear of not getting them at all, we kind of rushed ahead a bit in that, and so that was probably the first hiccup of the start of the year. But look, we've learned now a bit from that. We're trying to be a bit more in control of what we can do ourselves in terms of timings of different things on the farm, and I think that's really important for us, is having that independence, that we can prepare fields in the ground at the correct times for our crops to go in at the correct times, rather than relying on someone else to have to come in to do it for us. That's really important for us, so that's something going forward that we're going to should help us.
We'll go for a stroll down here and talk me through what we're walking past. So
yeah,
they look like carrots to
they
my
are,
eyes.
yeah. In amongst some of the weeds there's carrots, but so this backfield here is where we have grown crops using our farm dried, which we acquired this year through the horticulture grant aid scheme as well. So we got assistance from the department on that. We've grown about 3 acres of carrots here. So there's two sowings. We did one in May and one in July, early July. So this should last us all the way through till early next year.
And you're talking about this in a very matter-of-fact way. I'm looking at like a vast field of carrots.
Yeah.
I cannot grow one row of carrots. My carrots fail every single year. Like, it is not an easy thing to grow vegetables. I think we need to put that into proportion.
Well, it's definitely not an easy thing to grow vegetables, and in this year especially it's been very challenging. And I guess we're getting used to the different conditions and the different environmental conditions, as well as the different soil and field conditions here on the farm. It's our first year growing in a lot of these spaces, so it's getting to grips with a lot of that. But overall, it's been quite a success, I would say, with the farm Dryden the first year. A lot of learning. It's an automated seeder and weeder, so it uses GPS technology to know where the seeds have been placed, and then it weeds according to that.
Is that department support important, not just because of the costs involved, but I think there's only 60 vegetable growers left in Ireland, and you're bucking the trend in that you're actually coming into the business, you're not leaving the business.
Yeah, I think it's vital, and especially they're I think they're trying to do a lot in organic as well, especially. So I think if you're organic and in vegetables, you probably have the most help departmentally available to you in farming right now. So there is help there.
Is it still enough though? Because I remember visiting a vegetable farmer, and I was kind of blown away by the fact that he could point to a row of potatoes and he'd know exactly how much profit and loss he was going to make from that row, or salad or anything like that. I mean, are you making enough money? Are you going to make enough money?
I suppose the thing with jumping to this scale is you have to also scale your sales then, and you also have to scale your labour, you have to scale your post-harvest, so the costs go up as well as everything else. You can't really target those large customers for product until you have the scale of product available, or till you can guarantee that quality. So there's been a bit of chicken and egg happening this year on that side, but we've been able to grow into it. We do have a couple of large contracts that are going to be starting now in the next month or two, which is going to help us enormously. But it is that thing of just getting off the ground with it, and there's huge risk in that approach. There's huge risk, but I'm quite committed to the Cork Rooftop Farm business and the project that we've been driving with it, and trying to show that it can be done despite market trends and despite the trends of people leaving vegetable growing in their droves, and that it can be done at a scale as well that can feed a lot of people. I think that's really important. We were doing the market gardening, and it's no slight in market gardening, and there's a lot of great market gardeners around the country, but we're in Cork City here, and there's 250,000 people living in the city, and in most of the supermarkets that they go to buy their fruit and veg, they can't get access to locally grown produce, and I just feel that that's an absolute complete shame, and someone has to turn that around, or at least try to show what can be done, and there has to be buy-in from all the stakeholders. I think that's the really key part. I think I do feel like the department are doing are giving a lot of support. I think there can always be more, but they are really, there's a lot happening, a lot of good stuff going on there.
How have you found dealing with supermarkets? Because that can be notoriously difficult to get contracts, and then I guess to negotiate a price that you need.
Yeah, so we've been dealing with one of the major multiples, and I've actually found it refreshingly frank, the conversations that we've been having back and forth. It's very much a conversation rather than something being dictated to me, which is, everyone's heard the horror stories of what these kind of negotiations can be for tenders and things, but it's been more of a how can we help you, and how can I help them. It's been very much how can we be mutually beneficial to each other, which is refreshing, and I think we'll be able to show something different that hasn't been shown maybe in a supermarket in quite a while when we when we launch what we're doing. So that's very exciting, and I hope that will be a success for us going forward. We also have our own store on Cormac Street, which is underneath the Rooftop Farm, and we have our stall then in the famous English market inside in Cork City Centre. So that's been great to have that presence there, and that's really brought a whole new wave of customers for us as well.
And we should say we're sheltering under a hedge here because the rain is threatening. But it has been a funny year for growth, and I'm wondering how that has impacted the growth of your crops in terms of, give me an idea, say, where you're hoping to get a certain tonnage of, say, carrots, and that's going to be dropped, or what's the impact been?
The real impact probably was felt in June. June was extremely cold. There was a northeasterly wind there, just wouldn't stop blowing, and as a result soil temperatures just didn't increase. I think that's been seen across the countryside with grass growth, and that's where it is, and that also reflected in our crops here that we had in the ground, maybe that we planted out in late May, early June. There was just little or no growth for the month of June. So our winter squashes really were probably one of the ones that felt the brunt the most of that, due to their positioning on the farm as well. They probably get the brunt of a northeasterly the most here. So they were set back certainly by 5 to 6 weeks, just because of weather conditions, as were a lot of our brassicas. The field that we're in here now, we've got beetroot, onions and carrots, and we were a bit late getting in with the onions, just simply due to the conditions. So they're probably a bit behind where we'd like to have them. But the carrots and the beetroot we're quite happy with. Again, there'll be learnings there for us with the farm dried and how to use it better going forward. But to take it into next season, and we'll take all those learnings on board and hopefully come up with better results next year.
I'm wondering as well, in terms of how many people do you employ, because it's also notoriously difficult to get people to work on vegetable farms.
Yeah, there's two elements. I suppose we have to employ for the retail element, and we have to employ for the farm. So, and there was probably a 4 or 5 month period this year where we were getting the farm set up to grow crops, and there's people working here, but you've got no crops being harvested off the land. So that's a very tricky period to try to balance cash flow, and that's been another challenge when you scale. We find that because we're close to the city, it's probably a little bit easier for us to find people. In general, it's very difficult to find trained horticultural workers in vegetables. There's few and far between out there who have experience or knowledge. If they are out there, they're generally being held very tightly by whoever is employing them, or if they're doing their own thing.
And is it seasonal as well? Is that part of it?
But I suppose what we're trying to do here is give continuity in terms of employment. I'd rather keep that, but there is a seasonal element, and certainly there's peaks of workload where in July and certainly in the last 3 weeks, keeping up with the weeds is just you could be at it non-stop, but you also have to balance that with we have to get the harvesting done, we have to get crops out of the ground. That's what pays the bills and what's paying for everything going on here. So it's that balance is the tricky bit.
Do you have any idea, because you mentioned your shop, the English market, and you mentioned one sort of supermarket that you're talking to at the minute, and you mentioned, I guess, the population of Cork City. Do you have an idea how many people you're currently feeding, or how many people you want to feed?
Want to feed is probably I guess when we were doing the market gardening, I always thought that an acre could sustain up to around 80 or 90 people, or 80, 90 veg boxes that we weekly do for the CSA or for our veg box scheme. That would and we'd comfortably be able to rotate our crops through that acre. So if you multiply that out about over 60, what's that? That's 4,500. So I think we could, and I think with the scale we're doing in certain crops, we can probably push that up a bit. Certainly in courgettes, I feel like I could feed 250,000 people in Cork right now.
The trouble with courgettes is turning into marrow. No one wants a marrow. No.
So we've fallen down that rabbit hole a little bit, but there's certain things that I feel we could do really well, and supply a large proportion. But there's also public procurement that we'd like to look into again in next year. The law that's been put in for public procurement, where they have to use, I think it's 15 or is it 10% of the produce now has to be organically sourced for local government
So you get
agencies.
into some local businesses in Cork.
Yeah. We've had conversations with hospitals and things like that, but it does require processing and things like that to get into a lot of those places.
It's interesting as well that you talk about maybe feeding over 4,000 people, because this used to be a dairy farm, and I wonder if you'll end up feeding more people than the dairy farm will. And it's not a competition or anything like that, but it's interesting in terms of the diversity that's out there, because we make a lot of dairy products in Ireland, make a lot of meat products, but you do need some veg in there as well.
And there's also that connection. So I think probably a little bit of the connection, even for farmers. So dairy farming, I think, is probably quite an isolating job. You're early morning, late evening. You're 7 days a week at the farm. With vegetables, you're not as tight at the hip to the farm, and there is that tangible thing of having physical produce to sell to your local community, and that's quite rewarding and quite engaging. I think obviously there's so much milk produced on farms that it can't be a thing where there are some people doing it with the vending machines and things like that, but it's much more tangible connection, I think, when you're growing veg in your local community.
If we stroll out towards this field here, so obviously there used to be black and white dairy cows on this field.
Yeah.
What crop am I looking at now that's growing here?
Well, you've got to the left, we've got Chioggia and golden beetroot. And to the right we've got our carrots, we've got white onions, and there's two successions of carrots there, and then behind we've got a field of kale.
How do you turn it's quite rocky, it's quite stony this soil. So
yeah.
How do you turn what was dairy pasture or a dairy field into a vegetable growing field?
Well, you can get it. We ploughed, and I guess one thing that we try and avoid as much as possible is ploughing. And
why? Just for the person who doesn't know.
So I suppose it is quite a destructive task to soil structure. You're losing organic matter when you do that. You're losing soil carbon. You're disturbing, say fungal networks, and you do lose microbial populations by doing it. So it is quite a destructive thing to do, but it's, if you want to get soil prepared for a clean seed bed to sow into, then it's what we had to do. We're looking at different ways to approach it going forward. In our market garden space, we use large tarps quite a bit to block out the sun. And that allows us to have a minimal impact then on the ground and not have to disturb it as much when we need to get a clean seed bed. We can just kind of min till then, as opposed to do a heavy till. But it will be important for us now in this field that where it's had a heavy tillage, it's come in now, we've grown a few crops in it, we'll probably be able to do it again next year, but it'll be important that we keep that fertility high, so that our fertility program will be important for that.
And is this the machine then that you got funding from the Department of Agriculture for?
Yeah.
And so what is it exactly?
Well, so it's called a farm droid. So it allows us to, it's a seeder, a solar powered.
So these are solar panels on top.
Correct. Yeah.
It's got a flat roof, if you like.
It does. It's a kind of I don't know. It kind of looks like something you'd see out of photos from, I don't know, moon landings or something like that.
That's exactly, or an early Star Wars film or something.
But it's quite different to a tractor anyway. But
it does. I should explain. It has 4 wheels, and then it has, I guess, a control, a console panel, and it has kind of a joystick that you can, I guess, navigate for it to go. And then there is how many meters? Would we say that's 3 meters?
3.5 meters roughly squared.
And it's on solar panels on top of the 4 wheels.
Yeah. So during the summertime, it's fully sufficient for its power, so we don't it can run 24/7 using these panels, just with the long days and the even with the grey summer we've had.
Is it self-drive or is
it? It is, yeah. It's all automated, so it you plot out your field. You then you put in your conditions, so it depends on what you're sowing, and it automatically sows the field for you.
Wow. Does anyone need to be here when it's doing that?
You do need to keep an eye on it. It's very hard to just walk away and just leave it blindly do it. We did do it with the kale, and it worked. With the kale field, I started it at, say, I think it was 9 o'clock in the evening, and it ran through for for the 12 hours doing the sowing, and when I came back in the morning it was all done. So that's a nice feeling to know that it's working away at night time, and there's progress happening while you're in bed. But it's also just trying to fine tune how the process are afterwards when you come in and do the sowing. So it's the timings then afterwards when you come in and do weedings. It's also to do with spacings. It's certain types of seed as well have been tricky for us. Beetroot seed is quite noduled, so it can if it gets any bit of dampness, it can kind of clog and get caught. So that's been one challenge we've had. And then carrot seed is incredibly fine, so getting the densities correct with that was another challenge we had. But with the first sowing we had problems with that. Second sowing was absolutely perfect, no problems, and germination was great. So it's probably, I would say we've got the sowing side of it down. Now we need to get the weeding side of it perfected, because certainly it needs to do both roles for it.
So where are you going to be when I come back here in about 5 years' time?
That's a great question. Hopefully the trees we planted will be a bit taller and there'll be a bit more shelter, because that's something that we get affected by a lot up here is wind. I would like to see I suppose still a balance of using pasture and cutting that for mulches to work with our crops. The farm dried doing a lot more than it is now. Will you have a few more? I don't know about more. I think we need to maximise what this one does. I think there's a farm in the UK where it was able to manage 140 hectares. So it's now I'm not sure that farmer get any sleep, but it certainly can do a lot for you if you have it working right. So I would like to try and automate as much as I can with that. Trying to figure out how to be as sympathetic to the land when we're coming in early in the season, in terms of preparing the ground, and also if we can really fine tune our harvesting. I think that's really important for us. We harvest everything by hand here on the farm, and that obviously is very time consuming. There's no choice with lots of crops, but we're looking at options there as well for maybe some harvesting equipment that would be not heavy on the ground, really sympathetic. So we're looking at what they do in places like Japan and stuff, where they've got the average farm is 3 acres in size. So looking at small harvesting equipment that would bring efficiencies in that department to help offset with the labour shortages, I guess.
Are people going to think that you're mad to do this all organically and not using any pesticides, especially when it's on new ground as well that you're breaking for crops?
I think because I never grew up with any teaching about herbicides, pesticides, I couldn't think of using them full stop. And if I can't ingest it, I really don't want to put it onto my crops and my vegetables. So it's not even, I couldn't wrap my head around doing that, to be honest. It's probably anyone who asks what type of farming I do, I say vegetables, I get a kind of response, and then I tell them I'm doing organic vegetables and there's a double so it's certainly people see that it's a challenge. I never want to shirk away from a challenge. I think there's there are lots of examples of really successful organic vegetable growers in Europe. I think Ireland should have that same cohort of people. It needs to grow. We need to be able to supply more of our produce that's going into the houses. It's a shocking percentage currently, and it really does need to increase. So we need to, if people are going out into their stores, they need to try and find that local stuff and buy it and support, because that's the only way we can really drive this on.
Tell people where they can find you on social media, and if you have a website, because you have a very beautiful Instagram account. I think people must think you have like 10 social media marketing managers.
I've been a little bit neglectful of it recently, but no, I think social media, again, it's a great platform for young and existing farmers to communicate their message of the realities of what they're doing, because often it looks, there's the kind of Insta picture, but I think it's important that people are truthful as to how difficult it can be too at times. But we Instagram has been a big one, so you can find us at Cork Rooftop Farm on Instagram and on Facebook. And our website, corkrooftopfarm.ie, is where people can look to support us and sign up to a veg box.
Good. Do that. Thank you very much, Brian McCarthy. And for everyone listening, you've been listening to Organic Matters, the podcast brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. And for more on organics, you can visit their website, www.irishorganicassociation.ie. But for me, Hannah Quinn-Mulligan, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll be back again in another 2 weeks.